They limited me to, and Ed asked me if I could do this for 40 minutes and then have 20 minutes of questions. So if you have a question, if you would please wait that a little bit, and we'll try and do that. And then you see the books at the end of the table. Those are whole books written on the subject. So I'm supposed to condense them into a 40-minute talk, So that's, we might get there, okay? So I'll do the best, but I just want to take you through a little bit of what happened. And again, thank you for coming. I was a retired sergeant major. I've spent, if anybody was counting, 20 years, 2 months, and 23 days in active duty service. They called me a fast burner because I made the sergeant major's list in 16 years and ended in 17, when the average was 26 years. So I volunteered for a lot of stuff and tried to do my best for the country and make sure the taxpayers got their money for it. I was a distinguished graduate at the Engineer Advanced course. General Roper put me in for a direct commission. Charlie Beckwith swore me in as a first lieutenant and infantry. I acquired the Special Operations branch, so I was dual component and retired as a sergeant major and a retired reserve major. So that was my history and background. I held several MOSs, but we'll go into some other stuff. Okay. I'm not going to read you these two here, but this was kind of the mission in a summary. The first one and the fourth one there are kind of the same. We have to take two targets simultaneously at the same time so the other one doesn't alert the other one, hey, you got rescuers coming, okay? So those things had to be done simultaneously. And again, we're going to have to do that. Now, fortunately, right before this happened, we're talking November the 4th, 1979, the militant students took the embassy with quasi-approval of the government. And we had just finished, Delta had been formed, Delta Force, 1st Special Forces Operational Detachment Delta had been formed November 17th, 1977. And we were been given by the Joint Chiefs of Staff and powers to be 2 years to become validated. You get trained up, get the people recruited. So right before this happened, we'd gone through a validation. We'd had the top counterterrorist people in the world and top government agencies come down, and we took down two targets simultaneously. However, it was in a permissive environment in that we knew there were bad guys in there, but we could get to the target. This one was a little farther away. The other thing that happened was, it's 1,000 miles behind enemy lines, and there were a lot of similarities in what we tried to do with what happened in the Songte raid, for those in the military that may understand that. The other problem was, we didn't know where the hostages were. We knew they were in there. They're in one of the buildings in 27 acres. Well, take half of downtown Bard and say that's about 27 acres, and, go find 90 people that are hidden. So that was kind of the mission that we had, okay? We tried to return those without any, and we couldn't really supposedly hurt any civilians. One of the problems that we encountered as you go through this, we weren't supposed to let the Iranians know, but this was a joint military operation with units and people who had never worked together before. Some of you had experienced that while you were in the military. Never worked together before, and everybody kind of had their own agenda and what they wanted to do, and so there were some butting heads at the higher levels and that type of stuff. Some of the people that had been in special ops were worried that the other people participating, the pilots in particular, and all of us had volunteered to do what we do. The Navy pilots and Marine pilots did not volunteer. They were almost selected. And the first group of pilots came in November and December. We were training out in the desert. We had a near miss, almost killed a bunch of us. They were relieved, and we got some new pilots in. And then as we went and continued training, some of those were replaced, and we came in. In fact, one of the Navy pilots, when he was told in November that he was going to go do this, a Navy lieutenant resigned his commission and said, I'm not going to go do it. So some of them really, they were hoping they never had to do this. And so we were worried about their mindset, whether or not they were committed as we were. Again, they couldn't be aware of our stuff, you know, and there's one thing up here that I say, you know, many people outside of Delta, we're going to do this in total darkness, had never wore night vision goggles. You know, some of the pilots have never flown with night vision goggles. They hadn't flown at night. But we scrounged up and got them night vision goggles, and we gave them to them, and I'll go into that a little bit later, but they had a chance to practice with them and work with them, and we had used those. We had to beg, borrow, and steal everything that we had. Sometimes we just took it. We were out in Yuma training site out there, and the helicopter pilots were going over and get gas, and the guy that owned all the gas was going, how am I going to replace this? You know, finally there's a call from Pentagon, don't worry about it. You know, who's paying for this? Don't worry about it. We're just taking the fuel. Keep fueling the helicopters. When we were doing that, I've got one acronym up there. Some of you may recognize it, but HUMANT. Come on. No. Hold on. There we go. Part of the mission. We didn't have a war at the time, or any major military training go on that would cover our movement. So how do we move this force halfway around the world quietly so nobody knows it, okay? You couldn't tell anybody about the mission that wasn't involved, and people that became involved, some of them were isolated. I remember one Spec 4, he was a specialist on blizzards, fuel blizzards. And he came to teach us about fuel blizzards in November. He went into isolation for 6 months. They said, hey, come on, get on the helicopter, you're going to go talk to these guys, you'll be home for dinner. He wasn't home for 6 months. They took him in isolating and kind of put him up. So we couldn't have, again, we got to be in total darkness. There was no search and rescue. HUMANT is human intelligence. During the Carter administration, Stansfield, Turner's reign at the CIA, they had decided satellites could gather all the intel they needed, and they didn't need HUMANT. They didn't need to know what was being said in coffee shops on the ground. So none of that was there. And if it succeeds, we're only going to talk about the hostages, and all military are going to go back to what you were doing and keep your mouth shut. So here's a short timeline of what went on. It happened on Sunday, Tuesday the 6th. I happened to be in Atlanta. I've gone early down to Atlanta. I was at an International Association of Bomb Technicians and Investigators conference. Learning about EOD, not learning about EOD, but talking to other bomb techs about what bombs were going off and all that other stuff. I got a phone call, hey, come back home, grab your suitcase, grab a couple extra jeans, you're going to be gone for a week or so. I didn't see my home again until the 23rd of December. But that's kind of what happened, and along the way they released some of the African Americans and 5 of the females. That left 53 hostages, 50 at the embassy and 3 at the foreign ministry office, the other location. Now here's something that had to go on that a lot of people don't understand. Our support people, we didn't want people to know we were preparing. So on Fort Bragg, we would come into the compound, do our training, park our vehicles, go out to the range, do a lot of shooting and a lot of stuff. So the support people had to start every day. They would move vehicles around. They'd move them and go park them somewhere else and bring them back, park them back in there. And then the support people would go out there and shoot on the range and all that other kind of stuff like we were still there and we were still training to give the appearance that they ain't get ready to go do shit. You know? So, but that was going on. And there were a few incidents where people called and didn't know we were deployed, where they would call and want to speak to Colonel Beckwith or somebody in the chain of command. And I'm sorry, he can't come to the phone right now. You know, well, after 6 days of doing that, they got kind of old, but you couldn't tell him, I'm sorry, he's deployed and he's isolated and he ain't talking to anybody. You know, so that caused a few little things, okay, along the way. In the timeline, we returned in time to go for Christmas. The reason we returned is 2 Navy pilots almost flew into the side of the mountain in a CH-53. It was helicopter number 1. I was on it with Beckwith. It was hot out, and we had the tailgate down, and people were sitting on the tailgate, or we had it in for the guys got off the tailgate. But we're flying around, and all of a sudden the helicopter does one of these up here like this, and goes whoop, 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 and it's trying to climb real fast. and the tailgate hit mesquite bushes and stuff at the top of the ridge. We cleared it by 2.5 feet. Our commander was mad. He said, "Stop this shit right now, turn around, let's go back, land us." He says, "I'll weigh each one of my guys, I'll give you that equivalent weight of that, but we're going home, you ain't killing us. And call us when you learn how to fly." And that's when they replaced the first bunch of pilots. So we continued to train throughout this. And if you remember this, the Carter administration was doing many things. They took the Iranians to the World Court. There were many things going on. But because of daylight data, moon data, we had to have certain hours of nighttime to conduct this in to cover our movements. And so the end of April was it. If we didn't do it at the end of April, we had to wait till the fall. So they opted for us to do it. He gets approval on the 16th. We deployed to Egypt on the 20th. On the 24th, we moved to the island of Masira in Oman to air base over there. And right at dark, or after dark, we headed for Desert One. And that night and the early mornings is when, actually the next morning, we returned back to Masira after the accident was in Desert One. A lot of people, and I can show you in some of these books and magazines up here, was a Delta Theta. Guys, we were the basketball team on the bus, and the bus wrecked. We didn't wreck the bus. You know, a drunk driver plowed into the bus and wrecked the bus, and we couldn't get to the basketball game. Don't blame us. You know, we were passengers and hadn't even started doing part of our stuff. We were just on the doggone planes. You know, we were passengers until we left Desert One, and then Colonel Beckwith became in charge of the forward assault elements. But you know, as far as I know, we didn't do anything. But it did have good ramifications. There were some bad things that happened, but there were some good ramifications I'll talk about later. So we went into isolation. This is one of the few pictures that exists. I'm top center. Look like the little Dutch boy all the way up back there and there. Some of these people have passed away. I'm back up here. Sir, you may recommend Pete Schumacher right there, became Chief of Staff of the Army. That was when he was a young major. Yeah. You know, so several of the officers went on. Pat Hurley here actually perished in the first Gulf War. When he was over there, some of the people went on. This gentleman here and this gentleman were not part of A Squadron. This is mostly all A Squadron. Nobody knew he had brain cancer, and he died 6 months later. He was part of our assault element. And several other people on there have passed away. But what happened was, this guy brought a camera with him. John Martin, he ended up being our troop sergeant major, and he took 2 rolls of film. This picture and those pictures over there being some of those. When we got done with the mission, Colonel Beckwith was the classifying authority. He's the guy who could say this is classified, this isn't classified. He ordered all of our uniforms turned in and destroyed, and all photographs destroyed. John said he wasn't going to do it. He hid 2 rolls of film. He stayed in the unit for another 1.5 years. He got ready to become the sergeant major at Dead A in Korea, and he came to me and he says, "Phil," and then we got talking. "I got something, and you need to keep it secret for a certain period of time." So about 12 years ago, I pulled out the negatives. I went back down to the unit to the historian and said, "Look what I got." And they copied them, digitalized them, documented my uniform and all that other kind of stuff for historical value and all that other stuff. But otherwise, they would have all been destroyed. And there's really no pictures of East Squadron. There are other pictures of us on the ground in Egypt, okay? And the pictures of us on the ground in Egypt were taken by CIA assets. And they didn't come to light till about 10 years ago. So we go into isolation. So I'm not sure, I can try and zoom in on this. We were in isolation at Northern Virginia at the farm. There's a funny story about that because when we returned from the mission, we showed up at the farm and Jimmy Carter came to shake our hands and tell us, you know, thank you for even trying. And he brought Brzezinski with him, his national security advisor. And Brzezinski was wearing a shooting jacket, corduroy pants, and knee boots, rubber knee boots. And we're going, "What the hell's with this?" So we asked one of the, what the hell's with this? And the aide said, well, when they called him up and told him he was going to go shake hands with Delta today, he said, well, where are we going? They said, the farm, and he didn't want to step in anything at the farm. True story. So, in 1979, when we were in isolation in November, Colonel Beckwith and Bucky Burris were staying in not the Quonset huts we were staying in. They were staying in a different place at the farm. They had access to a little bit of liquor. And they had a couple drinks one night, and this is a photograph of a flip chart. Bucky had a couple drinks, and he started talking, because there's a lot of stuff going on in the Pentagon, weird ideas, and he starts talking, and he says, okay, here's what's really going to happen. So you see the C-1, the helicopter, U.S. Kitty Hawk, you see the RH not even making it to land, crashing. Actually, the first one conked out just as it got to Iran. At that time, we were going to do blivet drops, and it shows all the blivets flattened, which they did in one of the rehearsals, so that's when we decided not to do that. Solo surviving pilot trying to eke in out. The Rangers were to come and take the airfield the night we did the assault and seize. Pen and paper, these things here. Last year, the Silent Warrior Foundation did a special event to raise money and asked me to participate in it. And as a result of that, I went through detail all the equipment that we had. And there's like a 40-minute video on YouTube that talks about the equipment and how it's all modified. I've got some of it up here, but if you want to watch those videos, this one's about the jacket and some of those, and this is about some of the other equipment, and this is how we changed the equipment. But this is myself and our teams. And so we wouldn't get shot at spies. You have to have some kind of uniform, okay? And we thought we might have to E&E and walk out of there and do something else, so we got dyed jackets, and some of the students, the militant students, liked to dress like this, and they were kind of scraggly and everything, so we said, well, let's try and do that. We'll try and get scraggly too. Some of the guys even dyed their hair dark. I didn't dye my hair dark, you know, and stuff. But this was when we were in isolation, and the jackets and equipment were really modified. The equipment we have now was not available back then. So my jacket is right here, but what you can't see in that photograph is on the inside, it's modified to hold grease gun magazines. I was carrying a World War II M3A1 grease gun with a suppressed barrel on it. So I had 5 magazines here, 5 magazines here, a spare one here. The rope was not for rappelling. We had to go over some walls, we might have to crawl over obstacles, but its main mission was in case we had to drag a hostage out or get a hostage out. We had a rope, and so we hid it away. Got it. On the back, even it was modified. Some of you may recognize the 2-quart canteen, but the 2-quart canteen could cup off, and it carried my protective mask in it in case we had ran into gas or something like that, because we knew there was tear gas and stuff at the embassy. So we had those. And then there were 2 other pockets in here sewed in. That's where I kept my getaway money, and my false passport, and some of those. But this is my complete uniform. Insulated boots I had, I bought at Kmart and dyed them black. Military, the only insulated boots they had were the old bunny boots, cold weather training. We didn't have insulated boots. Gloves, golf gloves, dyed black. We wore black watch sweaters. I wore the old, some of you may remember, tan poplin shirt underneath this, and a black watch sweater. Had a black watch cap. On the inside of the black watch cap, I don't have this one, we had glint tape, so we could turn it over and inspector gunships could see us. One of the other things we carried, we referred to the hostages as canaries. So we got these little canary sweatbands, and where you see this deal, we had luminous tape sewed on it. So every time we find a hostage, we had wristbands that went on their arms, and this to go on their head, so at a moment's notice you could look and you could gather them all up and they would all be done. Unfortunately, whatever, I was never able to put this on any hostages till last August. I was able to put it on one of the hostages, one of the Marines at the ceremony at the Silent Warrior Foundation. But a lot of our gear here was improvised, and we had to deal with that. So somewhere over here, I've laid a remote control. Thank you. So deployment. So we deploy. These pictures were actually taken in Wadi, Kenya. Wadakena. It's got a different name. You can Google Earth it. It's still there. It was an old MiG base in Egypt. And it was a filthy place. We had to spend an advanced team in there because they had defecated all over the place. But that's where we deployed out. I'm right here. Some of the other guys are in here. But we were there for a couple of days. Got our gear all ready to go. Before we left and got on the planes to depart, Cherry Boykin, who eventually became a general, did a Bible reading of the David and Goliath. You know, we had 80 operators, and the rest of the 132 people were support, with the exception of one special forces team out of Berlin in Detachment A. There were 13 or 14 guys there out of them. We sang God Bless America, and he read that. That's actually on our memorial wall, the Isaiah, you know. And I also heard the Lord saying, "Whom shall I send, and whom will go for us?" And then said I, "Here I am, send me." So we sang God Bless America, and we boarded the planes and headed for Masira initially. So any pictures you see of us getting on planes, General Vox, bald head's right here. This is an agency guy, Bucky Burris, Dick Potter. I happen to be up in this one. Any pictures you see, these were the agency pictures that were released about 10 or 12 years ago of us getting on planes. Those are us going on the way. Anytime you see guys coming off the planes, it's after the mission was over and we had Desert One. So the guys look a little bit more dejected. There's a lot of diagrams. Essentially, we went to Masira. Helicopters leave off of Nimitz. We leave off of Masira. The advanced team goes to Desert One. And part of the team followed a little bit later. We link up there. We go to the hide site. We get off the bird. They hide the helicopters. We get on trucks that have been provided by our assets, go into Tehran. We do the rescue. Helicopters come in, start up, pick us up, take us over to Masira. Air base over there, which the Rangers have seized, and everybody's flown back out. And
that was the plan.
That was the plan. Okay? So, and this is probably, there's a lot of pictures and a lot of references of the, this is probably the best one on how the planes and helicopters were on the ground. So they came in and landed this way. Because of the accident, when this helicopter lifted up to reposition, it crashed into the front of that plane. But so the planes, this was the landing zone. They had never been out this way in the landing zone, but that's the way they had to take off to get off the desert. So B Squadron arrives first. As they pull up, there's a bus because it's cool and dark, a Mercedes bus with 40 people traveling across the desert. So they stop the bus. The Rangers under Wade Ishimoto head up the road to put roadblocks in to see whatever, and here comes a fuel truck and gasoline smugglers. They fired at them and they didn't stop. They signaled them to stop. They fired into that, but the guy apparently had on headphones and there was a pickup truck following him. Finally, they hit it with a law rocket. That kind of got his attention. And he jumped out, ran around, got into the pickup truck. They had motorcycles. They tried to catch up and stop that, so they wouldn't spread the word that we were there.
What'd you do with 40 people on the bus?
Well, initially, we took them off, and we kept them, and you're supposed to save your questions to last year.
I'm just reminding you.
We got them off, and we took care of them. We got them all together. We saw if they needed any medical help, and they were kind of scared. So actions on the ground, once we got there, that covered part of it. On the ground, this is actually Dietz did a print of the Guts of the Tribe. This is part of that painting, and I got it at my house, and we got it, and it took a while for it to be done. My wife said, little side story here, my wife says, "Why is it so dark?" I said, "It happened at night. There weren't any lights." So, anyway, we were waiting for the helicopters. 8 of them had taken off from the carrier. One helo had went down as it came into Iran. Another crew pulled out of the airport, out of the formation, went down, picked up those guys, and followed on, but that made them a little bit late. We lost another helicopter. They ran into the sandstorms, and then they went through one sandstorm and it wasn't bad, and then they came through another sandstorm. One helicopter who had a ranking Marine colonel on it, we don't know why he was on there, he wasn't part of the crew, he hitched a ride, I guess, whatever. But he was the ranking one and in charge of the Marine pilots, some of them. They asked him in 30 minutes from Desert One, they turned around and flew back to the carrier. Not think we're going to make it. Let's turn around and go back. They were 30 minutes out from Desert One. So that put us down to 6. The first ones that came in, they started coming in straggling. The first ones that came in, one of the pilots says, hey, I got a chip light came on, but I don't think anything's wrong. We're going to be okay. And then finally, we waited, we extended the time and extended the time. Finally, they got on, and the commander of all the helicopter pilots was in the last one to come down. He comes sauntering off like, hey, so this is it. So no sense of urgency, you know. We're going, what the hell's going on? And we said, well, all your pilots are good to go. As soon as you get refueled, we can take off, go to the high side. He said, well, I got to talk to my pilots first. So he walks over and he talks to this guy who said he had a chip light come on, who said he could continue to fly. He said that pilot, he can't fly that chopper. It can't go forward, which put us down to 5. So we said we're going to abort. And we had that in the plan. If we were going to abort, we're going to abort. We didn't have the choppers. We're going to come back 24 hours and try it later. Now, he couldn't go forward 2 hours and go to the embassy, but he could fly back to the carrier. I'm not a pilot, I don't know, okay? So anyway, so the decision was made to go ahead and board it because we didn't have enough helicopters. And so they started moving the helicopters so the planes could turn around. B Squadron went and got on one of the planes, which happens to be that plane right there that burned up. So all of B Squadron was in there, about 40-some guys were inside that plane, 40, maybe 50 guys were inside that plane, and they're sitting on a fuel bladder that's set up off the floor of that full of aviation fuel. And they've been fueling the helicopters back out behind them. This helicopter had picked up, apparently he had whited out with all the sand and everything running, and came in and ran into the C-130, crashed into it right behind the crew door on that side. He actually escaped. The rest of his crew died, and we lost some guys in the deal. Now they saw fireballs on the inside come in. B Squadron had been in there for a few minutes, and the whole time, everything on the ground was running the whole time. They had flared their engines, but they kept running, and they got plenty of fuel, so if they had to get out of there a moment's notice, they could. So there was a lot of noise and stuff, but so these engines were running. All the helicopters parked behind were running. They couldn't open this troop door in the back, and they couldn't open the tailgate. There were flames coming in. The only door they could get open, they finally opened the crew door, jump door on that side of the airplane. And in 7 seconds or less, they got about 45 people out. Which anybody who's jumped out of an airplane knows that's pretty good. Now, the guys on the crew deck perished. A couple of the crew chiefs that were helping finally got out. We got people out. They couldn't make it all the way because they were burned. They were trying to get everybody out. A couple of our guys ran back and got them, and they were badly burned. And a couple of our guys ended up getting soldier's medal for grabbing those guys and getting them off and getting them into one of the other birds. So what happened was, because B Squadron went in there and were getting ready for a flight back, they'd taken off their jackets, slung them back, laid their guns down. When the shit hit the fan, they got up and headed for the door. So there was ammunition starting to cook off, there were grenades starting to cook off, there were law rockets starting to cook off, and there were some red eyes starting to cook off. Initially, when it happened, again, we're in total darkness, and you're not watching everything going on, we thought maybe we were under attack. But it became fairly evident when we saw the rotors and stuff that we're not under attack, there's been an accident. So, all the helicopters packed behind us, we put destruct packages in them because we had all of our top secret crypto communications gear and all that stuff in them. This is not part of this wreckage. This is a CH-53 like this. The pilot had activated the destruct package. Several of the pilots did, i.e. 2 of the pilots did. 3 of them didn't, and they they abandoned their aircraft, ran to get in the closest plane they could get in, and it sat there and ran out of gas with all the crypto gear in it. And one of them had a black binder in it that had the total top secret to where our guys on the ground in Tehran were staying, what the assault plan was, the whole 9 yards. And yeah, it was should have all been committed to memory. Also, none of the crew members, they had left their jackets and stuff in there with their driver's license to Virginia Beach and all that, and we'd all been sterilized. So, we get ready to take off. I left on the last helicopter, or last plane going out. It was all the way on the right-hand side. For years, I thought as we took off, we had hit the road and jumped back up and hit the road. But Logan Fitch, who was on the same one, said he talked to the pilot 20 years later, and he said, what did we hit? How come those big bumps? Because we hit so hard at one time, we broke the outboard engine and it couldn't be functioned. So we're trying to take off with 3 engines fully loaded. And he said, what I was trying to do, because the sand was so thick, I was trying to get it airborne. I was trying to force it up, and we'd get up, fly a little bit, and then it dropped back down to the ground. And then fly, I get going again, and I try and do it again. He did that about 2 times. We had 2 great big bumps, and then he thought we were going to have to jettison. We finally got airborne and got out of there. And we headed back to Masira. So these pictures are actually, the top picture that's circled there, this one, is when we got back to Egypt, not Masira. Okay, so we went to Masira, had a head count, got everybody accounted for, put the wounded people on birds, on medevac birds, C-141s with surgery crews on them and stuff to take care of them. So this is the same guy. This is Dennis Wolf. He was one of the first DOD guys coming into the unit. This is him getting ready to go. Now, notice, we didn't have camelbacks back then. We said, well, how are we going to carry all this damn water? Charlie Duckworth said, rinse out a 2-gallon jug, fill it with water, and they actually gave us this little cloth over here. If you look around, some of the guys actually got bags that they're carrying the water in. Dennis is right here. But he was on the plane that burnt, and as you can see, he ain't got shit when he comes back. Okay? So we couldn't go back the next night or anything. We lost half our gear, and we lost all the helicopters. And Jimmy Carter looked at putting a strike in on the helicopters because all of our gear that was still on the helicopters and stuff, but the bus was still there, unable to move. Originally, the people on the bus were going, if we came back, and we were going to fly them out and they'd be guests of the U.S. government. And then when Masira was taken and stuff, or when we came back the next night to do everything, they would be returned. But so they did a report of what happened, what went wrong, what went right. Okay, and that's the Holloway Commission. That was Admiral Holloway and his commission who did it, who was a Navy admiral. And one thing I want to put, there were no real, how do I say this? No real blame affixed to anybody. Nobody did anything wrong. But I find something that's quite interesting. These are some OPSEC. You know, command and control was excellent, all those, and more tenuous down at the others. Yeah, it was. But it had to be a joint operation, and the only part they could give to the Navy really was to let them fly the pilots, and then they were replaced, and we had a mix of Navy and Marine Corps pilots. And their idea was Navy pilots had flown off and on the carrier, and Marine pilots had flown over land, so we're all good to go. Okay? But that wasn't necessarily the case. So what I like to point out is number 10. It's number 10, Mom. Okay? 2 factors. Unexpected helicopter failure rate. Helicopter doesn't fail when you turn around and return to base. Okay? And yes, they had flushed the engines and taken the screens off the motors and all those other things, but this second part of this, low visibility light conditions en route to those. Guess what, folks? We gave them PBS-5s, and you had 6 months to train with the damn things. You'd think you would have learned a little something, you know? Seriously. You know, how to fly the planes and do a little bit of stuff like that. Now, as a result of that, and a result of this, the United States was embarrassed. They didn't want this to happen again, and Special Operations Forces became infinitely better. We weren't embarrassed, but we ain't going to let this shit happen again. Okay, we're going to get serious about it. If you're going to get serious about it, you got to give the assets. So, in 1980, JSOC was formed, Joint Special Operations Command, Pope Air Force Base was formed. Okay, in case we need that and do this stuff again. And they're out of order, but a little bit later that year, they realized, look, Delta can't do everything, and if you're going to have ships and oil rigs and all that other stuff, we're going to need SEAL Team 6 to take the shit on the water. Okay, so they were formed later that year. Now, it took a while, and U.S. SOCOM was formed in 1987, but it was also part of this, okay? It came out. Soft units finally got Title 10 funds for weapons and equipment outside service budgets. We didn't have to steal from the other organizations to get money. We started getting our own money so we could buy and get the equipment we needed, which was good. Special Operations Aviation, the Army decided it needed Special Operations Aviation. Initially, it started as 160th Task Force and has become the 160th Aviation Regiment, the Night Stalkers. They are phenomenal. You want to go fly somewhere at night, you want to see guys who know how to operate helicopters or little birds or anything, I'll let those guys fly me anyway, even though I have crashed on one of their helicopters. We overloaded a little bird and there was high heat and, you know, he made a soft enough landing when I was riding on the pods on the outside, but yeah, we did crash. Okay, the U.S. Air Force and the Air Force Special Operations Command came up with their Special Operations Wing. We got more C-130s and more SCARs, so they upgraded everything they did. A better choice for pilots for this mission would probably the Vietnam experienced era pilots for the payloads. The difference between the payloads and the Sea Stallion, or not the Sea Stallion, the Navy's CH-53s, the CH-53s the Navy had could actually carry 6,000 pounds more payload. And that was the reason they were chosen over the Air Force ones. But Air Force pilots were probably more experienced, and in hindsight being 2020, you might want to use that. So, the other thing that happened is the Navy upgraded their special bulk units and upgraded their SEAL teams. Much like when Special Forces started getting some of that money and sharing that. The Marines, you know, the Marines for a long time said, and I know I got a couple Marines in here, all Marines are special. We got nobody special in the Marines. Well, they find out if you want to be part of MARSOC and get the money and do all this, you're going to have to. So they formed the Raiders, and they came on as part of Marine Special Operations Command down at Camp Lejeune. I did a lot of work with them when I was doing Homeland Security, used their shooting houses. They came on board in 2005. A bunch of good guys. They really are. The best thing up here is this joint doctrine. Okay? Everybody's playing off the same sheet of music. We're using the same, and this stands for tactics, techniques, and procedures. You know? So if I give this signal, which means stop, everybody knows that means stop. I don't have to go explain it to the Marine or the Navy guy or the Air Force guy or anything. We're all on the same sheet of people, and we train. And we're doing joint exercises all over the world together to make sure we can continue to do this. Okay? So that is infinitely better as we go through, and as it progressed. The other thing that happened is, guess what? We don't have to land in the damn desert anymore, you know, to refuel. Almost, if it flies in the air right these days, they put a pod out on the front so it can air refuel. We don't have to have jets to refuel from. They modified C-130s so they can do those. We came up with new infiltration techniques, fast rope. We got rid of the, you know, many of you may have repelled and done that other stuff. Fast rope, come up with fast rope. When it first came out, believe it or not, fast rope infill technique was secret. Until the FBI hostage rescue team came down to Fort Bragg, we trained them. They went back up to Quantico, called an international press conference, and said, look what we can do. And a secret infiltration technique became widely known across America at that time. We developed tactics some techniques with the little birds, the ones that we could put rockets and miniguns on and those things, or we could put operators in. The nice thing about those and the little birds, you can put 3 of them in a C-130 and transport them and land them and get them out. You can put 2 of them in the back of an 18-wheeler if you're in an urban environment, such like the U.S. Olympics or stuff, and you need to have a helicopter, and they can be up and flying within 10 minutes. So you can take your own aviation on and have those, okay? And all the equipment is improved, trust me. The guns are better, the bullets are better, the optics are better, the lasers are better. And just one example of that, I carried a flashlight about this size with hose clamps and balsa wood that carried it underneath the suppressor of my grease gun. All homemade, okay? This is the size of your light these days. This is not only a white light, LED, but it's a laser too. So technology's progressed just a little bit, okay? Which is all good. The holsters are protected. You can now get catalogs full of assault vests and boots and pants and all that other kind of stuff. And most of them, a lot of them now, are fireproof. You know? So that's where we're at. And I know I went a little over, but let's have some questions. Who's first? Honey, did you have any more?
I got a lot.
Let's let other people have a chance, dear.
I will.
Ma'am.
How does fast rope work?
Okay, fast rope. Fast rope is like a flexible fire pole, like they have in the fire department, firehouse, okay? So what happened was the fast rope initially was invented to tow tanks. And the British had it. And they had gone out and got all muddy, so they came back and washed them all off, and they went in a hangar and hung them from a ceiling, got up on the fire escape, fire walk up there and hung them from the ceiling. And some 2-2 SAS guy says, hey, this would be fun to slide down. Let's go up the deal and slide down. And they could do it barehanded and not burn their hands because they're real fuzzy on the outside and it dissipates the heat. And they said, wonder if we could hook this to a helicopter. And so 2-2 SAS started it. On one of his visits in early 1980s, Colonel Beckwith visited the 2-2 SAS and ordered the fast ropes from over there and came back and told us about it. And we came back and he decided, well, we need to be trained up and ready to go when these fast ropes get here. So he went and got us some 2-inch manila ropes. I've actually got a picture of a Black Hawk helicopter with 2-inch manila ropes hanging out. And we all burned our hands and legs real bad, right through the gloves and everything else, okay? The first fast rope we did in practice out of a helicopter was on top of Bryant Hall at Fort Bragg, North Carolina. But yeah, that's how. And
the fast ropes are made of cotton, which is a big difference from cotton-like material.
Yeah.
So they don't heat up the way that vanilla or nylon does.
yeah, yeah. The other thing is they've modified them since then where they've got loops on the end, so if you need to extract people out and you've got the right harness on or a harness on that will hold you in the harness, you can snap in, much like the Marines will be very familiar with the Fry system. And they can snap in and they can lift you up and take you out on those. Okay. Anybody? Sir.
So I just wanted to give you a little bit different perspective. So I was on the Nimitz when they went off.
Okay.
And I was in the engineering department and the damage control office. So one of the things that happened, just to give you another piece of information, so we were responsible for firefighting on the ship. And when the helicopters and the command, the special operations forces came on, we said, we're happy to brief them on how to energize the firefighting equipment in the hangar bay, and they said, we know what we're doing. And sure enough, 2 days before they went in, one of the guys thought he was hooking up, energizing power to the helo. He hit the sprinkler system for the hangar deck and doused 2 or 3 of those helicopters, one of which went down, the other one had a chip light. So there's some perspective
Yeah.
here. And we knew that there was a minimum number of helicopters that had to go off, which was all of them.
Yeah.
They
That's
all
just-
had to go.
Yeah.
They didn't all have to come back.
Yeah, well, they were all going to be destroyed eventually.
Correct.
At the airfield after they ferried people over there.
Right,
You know?
but they needed a minimum of 6, I guess.
Yeah, well, actually, they figured one would not start from the Hyde site, so they needed a minimum of 5 from the Hyde site to
Right,
come in.
right. So
And they figured one wouldn't cold start after it had flown in and got to the Hyde site. The
Right.
second Hyde site, they figured it went cold, so they were going to lose 1 or 2 there. We could actually do the mission with 4, but, you know,
Maybe.
Yeah, maybe.
And so the other thing was, we knew that, because we were watching the weather real close, and we knew that they couldn't afford to be flying into the first sandstorm of the year, which in fact is what they did. And so one of the risks, what made it unacceptable risk, was to be doing this in a sandstorm.
Yep.
You know, and you were there, so.
Yep.
And so that just made it to the point where it just wasn't gonna go. And the president was holding off, hoping that something was gonna happen. And then he finally said, you know, what's the last possible day we could do it? And they said, this day. And he said, and that was it.
25th or 26th.
And it came a day early. And so there were some premises, you know, some factors that changed that added to the risk of the mission, that unbeknownst to all the people that were there, because there were all sorts of different little pieces that were coming into play.
And not all talking to each other.
Right, and so, and it's hard.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, even if they were, they wouldn't know.
Yeah,
And so you ended up in unacceptable risk in a failed mission, but just, you know, that's what we were seeing from the Nimitz side of it.
yeah.
I did see him go
Well, I
off.
appreciate your service and appreciate your help, because I can't fly a helicopter unless somebody maintains it and puts fuel in it and takes care of it, you know?
Yeah, yeah.
So, you know, special ops can't do their mission without the support people. I don't care how good a special operator you are or what you do, you need those support people. And you know, good support people are worth the weight in gold. They really are. More questions, sir?
Yeah, Sergeant Major, you go beyond the desert, let's say you got in to Tehran, and we talked about not knowing where the hostages necessarily were specifically. Okay, no human, you said, but was there agency support, other, you know, connections in other countries that were giving you at least a, you know,
3 hours before we left Wadi Kenya, the agency says that we got a hot start for you. Yesterday, the day before, supposedly, we don't know if it happened a week before, a month before, whatever, the Pakistani guard, or the Pakistani cook who had been cooking for all of the hostages and serving them their meals, had been essentially held hostage too. They allowed him to go and get on a plane and fly the hell out. There was an agency asset sitting next to him. As soon as they got out, they took him, put him in isolation, and he told them, all the hostages are in the Chancellery, in the bottom 2 floors of the Chancellery. Which, when we talked to the hostages, when they finally got released 444 days, was true. We didn't know if the agency was blowing smoke up our butt, so I'm supposed to clear a staff cottage 4 hours before we launch. Guess what? You're not going there. Now, we'd all practiced clearing all the different buildings, but Logan's Bitch unit was to do that. So we thought we were going to still have to do those, but instead of this being the primary switch, just like when we went to Grenada, we swapped prisons, and you know, almost every mission I went on, at the last minute, we got some intel, and that was the intel that we got. Our best intel came in that we put some of our people on the ground. An agency guy ended up going in, I think, but Dick Meadows, who was on Song Tay Raid, who's a SF legend and all that other kind of stuff, Dick was on the ground. He's the one who got our vehicles. There was another guy, Fred Agia, who was on the ground, who was in Air Force when he started this. He was a Iranian by birth, still had relatives over there, had joined the Air Force, had volunteered to go do this, and his hire said no. And he went around his chain of command and said, look, I can speak good Arabic, I know the area over there, and Beckwith will come and see me. And he was on the ground with him. Now, when this went to hell, Dick Meadows used his fake passport, a couple other guys used their fake passport, and hurried up and got out of Dodge. He went south, linked up with family, and it took him 3 or 4 weeks to get out. He ended up down on the Persian Gulf, bribed a fishing guy to take him to Kuwait to get him back out. And General Bott says, young man, you did an outstanding job. What do you want to do? And he says, I want to be involved in aviation, learn to fly. He says, you got it. And he actually lives in Concord, North Carolina. And he very seldom gives an interview. And I never really got to sit down and talk with him until last August. I really got to sit down and talk with him and his experiences on the ground. And there are a couple other little things. So we had this warehouse we were keeping the trucks in. And the owner of the warehouse was worried about water pooling. So they go to check on the trucks one day, and they had dug a drainage ditch all the way around. You couldn't drive out because there's a ditch he said it's about 3 foot wide and 3 foot deep right in front of the front door. And so he said there were some kids playing over there, and he had some bags of candy, and he went over there and he says, could you kids do me a favor? Somebody made a mistake over here, and fill this ditch in so we could drive the trucks in and out. That's a story I didn't know until I talked to Fred. But yeah, and then Scotty McEwen was another guy who went in as an Irish guy. Scotty was in 10th Special Forces Group, some other things, and he was in the intelligence activity up by Virginia. But Scotty was on the ground. Later on, he worked for me, and then he taught at the O&I committee at Special Forces in Vietnam. But he went in as an Irish businessman and stuff. So, yeah. So at the last minute, we got some intel.
I guess the plan was to land the helicopters inside the embassy camp?
No, the stadium next to it. There was a big soccer stadium next to it, okay? And so what we were going to have to do is once we got there, we were going to quietly climb over the walls, go attack, and while we're doing the attack, Fast Eddie Westfall was going to blow a hole in the embassy wall. He had all those charges and explosives with him. So when we gathered them up, we would walk across, and then we had part of the white element was securing the stadium. And they would come in one at a time to land at the stadium. Now, there was plenty of room to land 3 helicopters inside the embassy compound. However, early on, a lieutenant colonel said, well, if I was doing this, I would have mined that area. And it put in everybody's brain that the area was mined. It was never mined, but by the time we had the plan, they finally got satellite photos that winter that showed footprints walking all across. Well, if it's mined, you aren't going to be walking across. They put up no obstacles, but they could have flown into, but because early on, that one with no intel, just supposition, decided that, well, it might be mine, we better not land there. It's the best choice.
And what did you anticipate encountering once you got over the wall?
Wait,
Was there going to be a bloodbath?
Well, if they put up a fight, yeah. Most of the Iranian guards that were guarding carried an FNFAL. We carried no body armor. It's easier to take a full core bullet and let it pass through and patch it a smaller hole than mushroom it before it goes through with a little bit of body armor. And we couldn't take body armor because the helicopters couldn't carry it away. And we didn't really have body armor at the time that we were going to stop at 7.62. So, yeah, I was one of the point guys. We were going to quietly eliminate them. If we perceived them to be a threat or anything, they were going to be quietly eliminated. Now, there's a movie that came out recently, last year, about this. And if you read and understand the movie that came out about this, and you may be able to get it on Prime or someplace else, it was released to the American public and the Iranian public. So it's not real tough on the Iranians. But you talk to the guys who were hostages, and yes, did they play Russian roulette with them? Many times. Yeah, they did. You know, and they didn't treat them well. You know, they kept the Marines separated. They afraid the Marines going to cause some trouble. They kept them separated from the other hostages and other things. But the Marines got even with them. But I don't have time to go into those. Afterwards, I can tell you how they did that. Sir?
I must have missed something. How many helicopters were destroyed and how many made it out?
Overall,
Yeah.
none of them made it down.
None of them.
One of them turned around. The one that was 30 minutes
One
from.
did.
One did. One that got 30 minutes within, turned around, went back to carry it. It's the only one made it back. The rest of them, one got destroyed when it plowed into the C-130.
Yeah.
They hit the destruct packages because all the pilots abandoned their helicopters, and the other ones sat there and ran out of gas, and that's why they sat in the desert for 6 or 8 months till the Iranians could get fuel and somebody knew how to fly them and move them out of there.
But you said 2 were destructed.
Huh?
2 on the ground.
2 on the ground were destructed, that left 3 on the ground, 3 on the ground running.
Okay,
And they just sat there and ran out of gas.
yes, okay.
Yeah.
What made that high-ranking officer that was in that one helicopter turn around and come back?
Nobody knows, and nobody really questioned him thoroughly about that.
Okey-dokey.
I'm imagining it might have been the amount of fuel they carried, but I've often wondered, I was like, well, they got 8 helicopters, correct? Did they okay, why don't we just factor in 4 more, or make it 10 or 12?
Didn't have them available.
They didn't have them available at all.
We're in the Carter administration where, I mean, when I was in the Carter administration and I was down in Panama before I came back up, we didn't have money to go do firearms training. We pooled our money together and went to the Rod and Gun Club and bought bullets so we could qualify.
Cold War.
Cold War, everything gets stood down. Special Forces right after the Vietnam War, now you gotta think this is 79, 5 years after. Height of the Vietnam War, there were about 16,000 qualified Special Forces guys. By the time I got back to Fort Bragg in 1976, there were about 1,500. With that whole brain trust just disappeared. So,
I have one question.
sure, Mike.
Did you, Charlie Beckler, okay?
Yeah.
When he called, raised his hand, said, we're gonna form Delta Force, a little guy stepped up, I don't know if you know him, little Paul Tracy.
No, I don't.
Oh, okay, it was an 051. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, he was one of the original Delta Force people.
Yeah, yeah,
That's
yeah, no, didn't know him. No.
What was his name?
Tracy was his last name. Tracy, I don't remember Tracy. Was it Paul Lawrence?
I think I know him through Colonel Baker, Bull Baker.
Okay.
I think he was in Delta.
Stand up, John. John was in Delta with me. So John was in Delta Force with me, and then he became one of the Halo instructors down at the Halo course and all that other stuff before he got out of the military. John's one of my good brothers, so anyway, he lives over in Cameron, Twin Cities. Came over. But anyway, sir.
Which one of you two, maybe he wasn't in the Eagle Claw, but were you in one of the planes that actually, the one that got on fire that blew up?
No, I wasn't. No, I wasn't. That was mostly B Squadron. You weren't with me. He was in A Squadron with me. But no, he was not in that plane that blew up and caught on fire. Now, one of the things that happened.
But all the Delta people got out.
All the Delta people got out. We had the only people that got out were people that went back to help somebody and burned their hands as they were trying to, help people and stuff. Those are really the only injuries we had. All the Delta guys got out. There were, I'm 5 minutes over time, but I'll still take a question if anybody's got any.